excited to have our speaker this evening, and we'll get to him in just a moment. So just to get us going here, if I can remember how to use Zoom, introduce myself and our co-leaders. I'm Brian Liverman, and I've got Patrick Marino and Jeff Hess as our other co-leaders. You might remember Sebastian Stossel. He was with us as well before. Sebastian has moved to the great state of Florida and taken on a new role, so he figured he would take a break. So if you see a lot of SpaceX stuff going on, he's working for SpaceX now, so reach out to him on LinkedIn if you'd like to. But Patrick and Jeff and I are rolling along with things. Jeff is actually, I think, on a break as well for this month, but we're still active in the group. If you want to reach out to Patrick or myself, I've got our emails attached there as well. Or you can also reach out to me through my work email, which is brian.liverman@vw.com. So we're excited to keep the Northern Virginia Tableau user group moving along, Nova Tug, and happy to have you all on board for the meeting. So let me keep rolling along here. So I kind of went through our happenings and so forth. I would like to note, if you want to mark your calendars for our next meeting, I'll also try to send out my typical emails that I probably blast and fill your email boxes with for our next meeting on November 17th. And we have Paul Albert, who's going to join us for that meeting. He was originally scheduled for tonight, kindly agreed to move to November. So that actually makes our life easier. So now we already have our next meeting ready to rock and roll. So for some of you who might have jumped on board to see Paul tonight, don't worry, he's coming next month. Stay on board with us tonight. We have a great speaker with Ethan on board tonight, and Paul was kind enough to do that. And I think Paul is, I thought I saw you on the call. If you want to speak up and do a quick plug for yourself, feel free to jump in and unmute yourself and speak away.
Well, thanks. I just want to talk about, I do Tableau instruction. And I've recently come to the conclusion that too much time and effort is spent talking about pre-attentive attributes. So I wanted to talk about that and give an alternative.
Perfect. Well, we look forward to having you. And again, thank you so much for your flexibility and working with us. And we look forward to having you in November. And thanks for joining us this evening. If there are other folks that have any job opportunities, any job needs, or any other big news that you'd like to plug away, feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and jump on in. Okay, so if we have some bashful folks, that's fine, or if nobody has anything yet, but you come across something later on, go ahead. Do you have anybody, or is that you, Patrick?
That's me. I guess there's no jobs available in Tableau. That's not a good sign.
There's plenty of them. So anyway, if anybody does have job opportunities that you're looking for, or know of people looking for jobs, or want to promote jobs that you have open and need to fill, feel free to use our group to help do that. We're fine with plugging away on our LinkedIn page, which I neglected, I think, to include in the presentation this month. So I'll try to put that in the follow-up email that I send out for the link to that. So if you haven't joined our LinkedIn page, feel free to use that link on the email that I'll send out to jump on board and get news. And again, you can use that as a way to promote yourself, promote job opportunities, promote anything that you think would be useful from a Tableau perspective. So I believe that is everything that I have, unless Patrick, you have something to run through or anything to go over?
No, I don't. I'm just really excited to get Ethan here.
Perfect. Well, I should stop talking here soon.
Yes.
Well, this is our agenda for the evening. So it's a real quick, easy agenda. We have Ethan set up for the evening as our primary speaker. So we'll have him use up as much or as little time as he needs to use, and have some time for questions and answer, hopefully for you as well. And then just a reminder again about Paul and our presentation in November. So at this point, I will go ahead and introduce Ethan Lang. He's Senior Manager of Analytics Engineering at Playfair Data, and he's going to do a presentation on components of layered graphics. So instead of me telling you about it, why don't I remember how to stop presenting here, and I will let Ethan jump on. So let's hit stop and let me mute myself and Ethan jump on.
Perfect. Can you see my screen, Brian? Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for coming out here. Thanks, Pat and Brian, for the invite. Really excited to get in here and present this content to you. But first, I wanted to thank everyone for coming. I know time is valuable, so I really appreciate everyone taking a time out of their evening to come here and listen to me present this content to you. So let's get started. All right, so my name is Ethan Lang. Like Brian mentioned, I'm the Senior Manager of Analytics Engineering at Playfair Data. I'm a co-lead of the Veterans Advocacy Tableau user group. If you guys aren't familiar with that Tableau user group, what we try to do, our mission is to try to help veterans that are transitioning out of the military into the data field. It's a really great field to get into. So our group is set up as a community where they can come and network, learn, find a mentor, things like that. We also work with veteran organizations, typically nonprofits, and we do this just on the side out of our own time to kind of help them find insight and drive action using their own data. So we are helping a few veteran organizations right now, actually. So pretty exciting stuff. If you guys want to attend the group, I definitely recommend it. I'm also a member of the Tableau Speaker Bureau. So this is just a collection of individuals throughout the community that have kind of signed up to volunteer their time to speak at events like this. It could be a TUG event. It could be a full session at the Tableau conference. I actually had the honor of speaking at the Tableau conference last year. So not this content. This stuff is brand new, but it was a great time to be able to speak at the conference. It was awesome. All right, well, let's dive in. So the 6 components of layered graphics. And really, this is just a fancy way. It sounds more fancy than it really is. You guys probably, if you do any Tableau development, you probably implement this tactic every day. This concept is where it's a step-by-step approach where you're essentially layering more context onto your data visualization as you build it. All right, so the first layer in this process, there's 6 layers. The first layer is data. So this is where you would start to identify what data source you're going to connect to. Maybe you're identifying your measures and dimensions you're going to use, that kind of thing. The next layer is mark type. So this is where you're going to start to identify how you're going to visualize or encode your marks onto the view. The next layer is aesthetics, and this layer is probably my favorite layer. This is where you can really start showing your analytical chops and diving in and making something very unique that's going to draw the user into your data visualization. The next layer is filtering and subplotting. So this is going to be where you're adding in more user experience for the user to start slicing and dicing the data and looking at the data in different ways to draw insight from. So again, you're adding more context as you go. The last layer, or excuse me, the 5th layer is statistics. This is where you're going to start getting into probably the heavy hitter as far as making inference and stuff like that on your data and your data visualization. It's going to add a lot of context there. The last layer, I didn't give it credit that it's well deserved. It's the last layer is theme. Theme is where you're going to start building in the architecture around your data visualization. This is where you're going to start incorporating your branding, maybe incorporating buttons or toggles that the user could use. But this is really where you're going to start putting that professional polish on your data visualization to really drive adoption of the tool within your organization. So before we get started into more details on each of those layers, I do want to just present a little history behind this idea. I have to admit, I did not come up with this idea. I've kind of done a lot of research on it, and I've found kind of 3 different resources that I just want to point out as kind of inspiration that I use to build this content. The first is Hadley Wickham. He's an author, but he's also the author of a very famous R library. If you're familiar with R code, it's a library called ggplot. And he built this library after he got some inspiration from the next author, Leland Wickelson. So Leland Wickelson wrote a book called The Grammar of Graphics. And Hadley Wickham read this book, kind of got the inspiration and wrote that R library. And he kind of tips his hat to Leland. The GG and ggplot2, which is the library, it actually stands for Grammar of Graphics. So again, kind of tipping his hat to Leland for the inspiration. But like I said, I have been doing a lot of research in this area, and it's really started back in the kind of starting of the digital age, where you're starting to build and incorporate graphics within a computer. So encoding data visualizations within a computer is really where this concept originated from. The earliest find that I could find on this topic was from this book. It's called The Symbology of Graphics by Jacques Burton. It was published in early 1980s, but this is where he really started to introduce this concept of, when you're building a data visualization using a computer, you're kind of layering in these different components to create a whole data visualization. What's interesting is this topic has really been picked up and used by a lot of modern data visualization tools as well. I did want to mention that. Tableau actually uses this concept in the background. Like I said, you guys probably go through this process every day without realizing it, but they really have built the tool to kind of incorporate these concepts as you go through, and they kind of walk you through that, which you'll find as I present through this. But the first layer is data. So before we get started, this is really where you're trying to figure out what data source you want to connect to. There's a lot of things that go at play within this layer. Access to the data, maybe it's a hardware or software constraint. There's a lot of things that can happen. But where I really want to start off is with the basics. Really, when you start connecting to data, you kind of find that there's two different data source types, if you will. One is unstructured data, the other is structured data. We're going to start with unstructured data, and I'll just kind of preview a quick example of what this could be. If you're familiar with any kind of finance report in Excel, you've probably seen this exact Excel sheet where you have dates across the top, moving from left to right. You don't have any column headers. You may have entire columns that are used solely as to create a border or some sort of summation line within the workbook. There's all kinds of problems with this kind of data. Other examples of unstructured data, though, it could be a PDF that you're connecting to. Tableau does have the power to connect to PDFs. It could be an email file. It could be an image, a video. Maybe it's an audio file that you're trying to do some sort of textual analysis on. There's all kinds of unstructured data sources. The most common, though, is kind of this Excel sheet that you will see almost in every finance department ever. The next is structured. So the idea is you want to take your unstructured data and get it into a structured format. This is really how Tableau and many modern data visualization tools need the data to be in, is in this kind of tidy format to start loading into the tool and building data visualizations with. So just to kind of touch the basics again, you can see that we have column headers for each column. Each column represents a unique value. Each row represents a unique observation. Examples of structured data sources. If you're working directly with a SQL database of any type, I would imagine that you're probably connecting to a structured table or view. If not, you're probably connecting to that data to get it into a structured table or view. Other examples could be spreadsheets that you get, a CSV, things like that. Now, there's kind of three rules of thumb that I would say when it comes to structured data. The first rule is that each column would represent a unique variable. The second rule is that each row, again, represents its own unique observation. And the third row is that each cell is populated with data. You don't want any nulls or NA values within your data. So you really want a full, rich data set. The next step is connecting to and kind of figuring out what your measures and dimensions are. So when it comes to measures, Tableau identifies these and defines it as any numerical value that is a qualitative value, or excuse me, quantitative. A dimension is any quantitative field that could describe your measure. So as an example, your measures would be things like sales, or maybe an aggregation of some sort, like the sum of sales that you've created using a calculated field. Examples of dimensions could be things like date or customer ID, product ID, things like that. To kind of drive the difference home, as an example, say I connected to my data and I just pulled in the sum of sales, and I saw that I had $10 million as the sum of sales. Without a dimension member to kind of break that data down, that's really all I would know, is that I have $10 million, which is great. However, if I were to bring in a dimension, say date, and I dropped date onto the view, and I found I had $8 million last year, and this year we've made $2 million in sales. Well, now we can start really driving home and making context with the data and trying to figure out, was that just a really good year we had last year, now we're going back to normal? Or maybe you can start asking questions like, what's going on this year? So once we've kind of identified our data source and connected to our data, we've identified our measures, our dimensions. Now it's time to start thinking how we're going to encode those marks on the view. So we have to select a mark type. So when I say mark type or encoding, really all I'm trying to say is, what chart type are you trying to use? Tableau makes this really easy. By default, if you drag in any measures or dimensions onto the view, Tableau is going to take a stab at visualizing that data. Typically, I'd say about 80% of the time, it's either going to be a bar chart, a line chart, or a scatter plot that you'll end up with. However, Tableau also makes it really easy to change how you want to encode your marks. On the marks card, this dropdown, if you were to select it, you can actually change the mark type right there from that menu. So you can change it to line, bar chart, area chart, shape, circle, any of those mark types. They also take it a step further, and if you don't want to necessarily change individual marks, you could change the entire data visualization with the Show Me tab. So at the top right, you can click the Show Me tab, and you can change the entire data visualization and how it's visualizing your data with the click of a button. Depending on what measures and dimensions you have on the view, Tableau already highlights and allows you to select specific data visualizations within the Show Me tab. All you have to do is click it, and it will repopulate your data in that new view and viz that data for you. Now, the great thing about Tableau is that it's so flexible and diverse. You're not stuck to just like those 20 different data visualizations within the Show Me tab. There's actually hundreds of chart types. I found this resource in Tableau Public, and it's probably my favorite. There's a lot of resources out there that touch on a very similar topic. And as a matter of fact, Kevin Flaherledge, who's the author of this Tableau Public, he credits a lot of those resources right here within this Tableau Public. Andy Kriebel's, it's very famous, called the Visual Vocabulary, something he published. But really, the reason I want to show you guys this one in particular, if you go to this Tableau Public viz, he's actually encoded, it's 100 different chart types, and they're all unique. And this is where you can really start looking at more advanced chart types and kind of getting a great idea of different ways to visualize your data, whether it's at your professional job, or maybe you're creating a Tableau Public yourself, some sort of data visualization, or maybe you're just trying to upskill and come up with new and creative ways. The great thing about this particular resource is you can go here, you can click on any one of these chart types, and it will take you to that Tableau Public viz. You're able to download that visualization workbook, the entire Tableau workbook, and you can re-engineer what that author has put together, and maybe even incorporate your own data within the tool itself. So it's a great way to go and try to, just learn to do new things and create new chart types and stuff like that. It's a great resource. Let's see, moving on, the third layer is aesthetics. So like I said at the very beginning, aesthetics is probably my favorite layer. This is really where you can start flexing your analytical chops. Anyone can connect to Tableau and drop a few measures and dimensions in and create a bar chart. Anyone can do that. It's very simple. But at this layer, this is where you're going to start encoding color or size or shape into your view. And this is really where you're going to start driving context creating value for the end user. So like I said, there's several aesthetics built into Tableau. I'll touch on a few of them, starting with color. Color is the most effective way to drive context within your view. It's the most effective way to draw the attention of your user to specific content. So color is very powerful. But with that being said, you have to be careful with color. You don't want to break your audience's perception of what color should represent. For instance, if I was trying to visualize the bottom 10 products in my product line, I wouldn't want to encode the bottom 10 with the color green. It just wouldn't make sense for the end user in most cultures. Once you have dropped in color and encoded your marks with color, if you click on the color card within the marks card section, you'll see this dialog box appear. This is where you can start changing the color itself. You can incorporate your own branding if you wanted to. You can change the opacity or the transparency of the mark. You can also add borders to the marks and change the color of the border and stuff like that as well. So there's a lot of things and a lot of unique things you can do right from this menu. The next aesthetic I'll touch on is shape. Again, shape is a really powerful way to draw attention to specific things, excuse me. Shapes have a lot of unique use cases, specifically when it comes to the UX or the design of the tool. Using custom shapes, that's where you can start working in things like toggles or buttons. You can also use what's defaulted by Tableau and create buttons of your own by dropping a shape onto the view and adding a label. Another great thing about shape is it's a great way to identify very specific things and again, work in those custom shapes to draw the user's attention. As an example, if I had a scatter plot where I was plotting out on a quadrant, different tech companies, I could use shape as the way I'm encoding that aesthetic, and I could use the company's logo to encode the marks. It'd be a very valuable way and a really good way to draw insight for the end user. It would reduce the time to insight, as a matter of fact, quite a bit, I would imagine. The next aesthetic I'll touch on is size. Again, size is a great way to draw the audience's attention to things, but it's really good when paired with color or a shape. That's where I find the most value out of it, just personally and professionally. But with size, you can encode size using a calculated field or a measure or dimension. Once you drop it in, if you click the size card, you'll see the slider appear. And this is where you can start changing the size of the marks on the view. One great thing I like to do with size is, if I'm plotting a line on a line chart, you can actually just click on size without even dropping anything to it and change the size of the line itself, the line thickness, or the point size. If you're using shape or circle to encode your marks on the view as a mark type, you can just change the size by clicking the size button here and using the slider. The next aesthetic I'm going to touch on is overlooked, I would say, by a lot of folks. It is the X and Y coordinates and encoding those axes on your view. So because it's not necessarily included on the marks card, I would say it's overlooked quite often, but it can be a very powerful tool. As an example, what I like to do with it is once you have an axis, if you right click on it, you can edit axis or click on edit axis and you'll see this dialog box appear. Once it appears, you can actually adjust the range of your view to zoom in on the data. This gives a very unique view into the data if you wanted to see a very specific problem, or maybe you have a lot of marks on the view and you just want to get into a very focused subset of that data. This is a great way to do that without filtering out any other data. Another great technique that I like to incorporate using my axes is my axes labels. So within this dialog box at the very bottom, you can change the label of your axes. I don't know about you, but as a developer, when I create calculated fields, sometimes I just name them very random things. They make a lot of sense to me, but to an end user, it might make no sense at all. So I like to come here, edit the title to something that's a lot more user-friendly, or maybe even add a subtitle to draw more inference onto that. The last few aesthetics I'll just briefly touch on because they're pretty self-explanatory. The first is labels. Labeling your marks on the view, you would just drop your measure onto label. It's going to label all the marks on your view. What's really great about label, or where you can really start drawing power, is by clicking on the label card, and it's going to bring up a dialog box where you can start doing things like changing the font or the size or color of the labels. But it also allows you to encode the label on specific things within the view. For instance, if I want to label only the min and max values on my table or my chart, I could do that by clicking that dialog box and just making that selection. It's very easy. The next aesthetic is tooltips. This is very, very useful, especially if you have a lot of marks on the view. You don't want to put a label on, 150 marks on the view because it's just going to get all jumbled up. Using a tooltip will allow the user to just glide over the chart and see the underlying data within those data points or those marks. Another great thing is to incorporate a Viz and tooltip, which I believe was incorporated in 10.4, it could be 10.3 version of Tableau. That again is another great way to draw insight and kind of build more context into the data itself. Next is details. If you want to change the level of granularity within your view, you can drop things like product ID or customer name onto details, and you'll see the level of granularity go to that level. It's very useful, especially if you're doing things, analysis using a scatter plot or something like that. Details is a very useful tab. The last one is angle. And before anyone jumps down my throat and starts speaking up about trying to sell them a pie chart, I'm not. Angle is very useful, especially when you start getting into some of those more advanced chart types. This is where you're going to start making the angle of some of those polygons and stuff like that, angling and making that curvature within the view. It's a very useful aesthetic once you kind of get up into those different chart types. Okay, layer 4, filtering. Filtering is very powerful. As an example, I've created this, and this is probably the layer that I'll touch on the least because it is pretty self-explanatory. Filtering and subplotting allows your users to slice and dice the data and draw more insight out of it. I create an example here. If we draw our attention to the chart on the left, we can see we have stock A selected within a filter selection. If we were making a decision on whether to buy stock A or stock B, we've just allowed the user to easily filter into that specific stock and see the data that's underneath it. We can see with stock A, it's had a really good ramp up, but it's starting to trend down. We've included a forecast here where we can see that it's forecasting over the next few periods to be in the red. Stock B, however, if we chose that on our filter, we can see it's kind of forecasting to be positive. So we see more green there. If we were trying to make the business decision of whether to buy stock A or stock B today, we would probably buy stock B based on this data that we have. We buy it now, it's going to go up a little bit, we could sell later. Again, this is used as an example just to draw the focus on filtering itself. Again, it's a very powerful part of the layering process and a very powerful way to draw more context within the data to the end user. Layer 5 is the statistics. Like I said, this can be a very, very powerful way to draw more insight into your data or to really start making inferences on your data. But with that power comes a lot of responsibility, as we've all know. So you really have to kind of do a little research and know what you're doing under the hood to make those inferences. However, I'll briefly touch on several ways that you can incorporate statistics within your view that are going to bring a lot of value to any kind of report that you're building. I'll start with the first two. This is an average line and the average line with a 95% confidence interval. You can see here that by toggling to the analytics pane from the data pane, we can see these options appear. And if you wanted to incorporate them within the view, you could simply drag them onto the view and you'll see the dialog box to the right appear. This is just alerting us that all we need to do is drop it on one of these options, and it's going to add that summary or the summarization or model directly to the view. So if we drug average line to table, it's going to draw an average line across the entire table on both the Y and X axes. You can see we have those options highlighted right below where you see table, where we have column and rows. Now, if we wanted to add it to, for instance, if we had segmented, or if we were showing segments by quarter, and we wanted to add an average line across the segments, but by quarter, we could drop that average line directly to pane, and it would add those reference lines to the view by quarter. If we want to add an average line to every mark on the view, we can simply drop it to cell and it will incorporate that for us. The average line with 95% confidence interval is exactly the same. However, it's going to add an upper and lower bound value around the average line that represents that 95% confidence interval. And when I say 95% confidence interval, it basically means if I were to sample that data 100 more times, we would most likely find on average that the average value would fall within that upper and lower bound. I'd say 95 of those times. 5 of those times, it's going to probably fall outside of those values. That's kind of a quick and dirty way to explain those confidence intervals. The next one I'll touch on is the median with 95% confidence interval. Again, this works very similar to the average, except it's going to represent the median. And the reason I wanted to bring this one up is if you used it in tandem with your average line, it's actually a great way to identify outliers within your data. Typically, if you'll see your median and average pretty far away from each other, you most likely have some sort of outlier. So again, it's just a great way to draw insight and make more context within the data visualization. The next three I'm going to touch on, I'll touch on briefly. They are more statistical on the back end, but I'll start with trend line. You can see with trend line, we have 5 different options. Today, I'll talk about 2 that I find are used most common. One is going to be the linear trend line, and the next is the polynomial trend line. With a linear trend line, it's really just going to add a straight line across your marks. What it's trying to do, and what the statistics in the background are trying to do, is reduce the distance between each mark and your line to create it's called a mean squared error, or minimization of that. It's going to draw that line across to where it minimizes those distances. This is where you can start making a lot of inference, especially if you have a statistical significant line. If you right click on that line, you can actually describe what's going on underneath, and Tableau automatically runs that formula and algorithm to produce your coefficients. Your coefficients are going to tell you if there's a relationship between 2 different data points within your data. Those relationships may be a positive relationship. For instance, if one goes up, the other one will as well. The relationship might be a negative relationship. As an example, if it goes up, this one will go down. Those are great ways to draw inference out of your data, and a very simple tactic you can implement. The next I'll touch on, like I said, is polynomial. It works very similar to the linear trend line, except that you can add breaks in the line. Tableau is actually flexible enough where you can go in and edit how many breaks you want. So you can add 3 or 4, and it will smooth itself over and add those breaks in that line to go across your data. Again, like I said, it's another great way to draw insight and information or inference from your data using these techniques. The next one I'll touch on is forecasting. This is a very, very awesome tool that Tableau's built in here for us. With this forecast model, you simply have to create a line chart with date and drag your forecast in there, and it's going to forecast out X amount of periods. You can actually, again, Tableau is very flexible. It allows you to denote how many periods you want to forecast out. Very useful tool. Another great thing about this tool that I love is even if you're not, if you don't understand all the statistics in the background that are going in to create this, If Tableau doesn't come up with a great model, it'll simply just add the average across your view as a forecast. So that way you kind of know, even if you don't know what's going on in the background with that algorithm, you know that there's not enough data there to really produce a good forecast. So it's just going to forecast out the average. A lot of times, if you're aggregated up to, say, a year, you may just need to include more data behind that forecast. Maybe go down to week date part, or maybe the date part of month, to get more data and more data points to make a better forecast itself. Because it really is going to rely on the seasonality and the trend of a long-term data set. But again, this is a great technique you can incorporate within your tools, and a great way to flex your analytical chops there. The last one I'll touch on is clustering. Clustering is another awesome technique you can use to draw inference out of your data. Again, even if you're not statistical savvy, this is just a great way to show even non-statistical people inference within your data. All you have to do is drop clusters onto your view. Tableau is automatically going to group or find groups within your data and create a custom color palette for that. So it'll identify, I think by default, it does 3. But again, Tableau is very flexible. It allows you to pick how many groups you want to find. If you're looking for, maybe you're trying to find different ways to market or different groups of products that you could lump together in a marketing group. This is a great technique you could use to find those kinds of inferences. It's very handy. And like I said, even if someone's not statistical savvy, if you showed this to an executive that doesn't know or understand what's going on in the background, it's very simple to interpret. It's simply groups of colors on your view. And like I said, color is the most effective way to draw context or to add the aesthetic onto your view. From statistics, that's all the models that I'll talk about that are natively built in within the tool. But I do want to touch on this very briefly. I don't want to get too in the weeds on this. But if you're looking to do more advanced techniques on statistics and using coding languages like R or Python to create things within Tableau, I did want to just briefly mention that you can connect to those external sources directly from Tableau and write in those coding languages directly within Tableau. If you click Help at the top nav and go to Settings and Performance, you'll see an option called Manage Analytics Extension Connections. If you select that, it's going to ask you if you're connecting to R or Python or maybe some other package. You will need those other packages and software installed on your machine before you can make the connection happen. I do want to just mention that as a disclaimer, but this is the steps you would take within Tableau to make that connection. So if you have R or RStudio installed, you could install a library like rserve and just activate that locally on your machine. And you can run R code directly from Tableau using that rserve locally on your machine. If you have any more questions or want to know a little bit more about this, I'm happy to chat with you through it. You can reach out to me via email. My contact information will be displayed after the event. But I also recommend just Googling it. There's a lot of resources out there that will walk you through how to download those other softwares and make this connection happen, if that's something you're interested in attempting or trying out. So layer 6 theme of all the layers built in within Tableau that we've covered so far, this is the last one, but this is where I would say Tableau just absolutely fails at. It makes it very easy to add data or to connect to data. It makes it very easy to encode your marks with aesthetics. Tableau makes it very easy to add a statistical model into your view. However, if you want to do something very simple, like round the edges of an object on your dashboard, Tableau cannot do that. It just blows my mind. You would think a modern data visualization software would have those kinds of design techniques that you could do. However, there are ways to go around it by going and exploring softwares outside of Tableau. I've identified 2 as kind of my top favorite, at least right now. One is Figma, which is the icon to the left. Figma is a free design software. It's extremely easy to use. I would consider myself more of a coder, analytical thinker than a designer. I'm probably not the most creative person on the planet. However, even for someone like me, I can get into Figma and easily create these objects that I can incorporate within the UI of my tool to just build a better experience for the user. Not only that, but incorporating an architecture around your data visualization is really going to put that professional polish. And from what I've seen, it drives adoption of your tools within your organization. So anyone can, like I said, build a bar chart, but if you build in an architecture around it and make it nice and very easy to use and incorporate some of that UX design, it's just going to be, it's going to floor your users, truly. The next one I've identified is Adobe XD. Adobe XD is a subscription service. So you will have to pay a monthly subscription, but it comes with very unique tools, such as Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop. These tools, if you're getting to more advanced design techniques, are very handy to have. So whether you want to subscribe to it personally, just to have that under your belt as a tool, or maybe you could position to your organization, the advanced capabilities that could come with a subscription to that and have them pay for it. Again, I highly recommend it. If that's not something you're interested in, Figma is a great place to start. It's absolutely free. You go to figma.com, you can create an account in no time at all, probably 3 minutes, and you can start creating objects to export out and put in as images within your tool. Again, it's a very, very good way to drive that theme and to build an architecture. Let's see, I think I've covered all of the layers. I did want to go through an exercise, but I'll save that to the end. So now that we've kind of gone through all that, I do just want to mention a few resources that I would recommend if you're looking at upskilling, or like I said, maybe trying to find a different chart type to incorporate within your tools. The best one that I've identified is Tableau Public. I think of Tableau Public not as a place to go sometimes and build a really cool infographic and put it up there. Tableau Public is a repository of information. You can go there, you can download and figure out how to create new chart types. You could go there if you're interested in specific data. You can download the workbook and try to find data you're looking for. There's a lot of great things that come with Tableau Public. So highly recommend it if you've never checked it out. If you have checked it out, maybe those thoughts will give you kind of new hints or ways to use Tableau Public as a repository of information. Another resource is Playfair Data. So we have a lot of different continuing learning paths at Playfair Data. To start with, we have our virtual flagship training. It's something that we've piloted and we really liked. It's been very successful. So now we do offer our flagship training with Ryan virtually. Our next event is in April. Then there's our Tableau blog, or excuse me, our playfairdata.com blog. We blog all the time. All the members of our team. I blog, members like Maggie or Maddie, they're very active on the blog. Ryan obviously is blogging all the time. It's a great place to go and find out new tips and tricks to incorporate within your tools. We also have Playfair Data TV. If you're not familiar, there's over 24 hours now of recorded tutorials. These are things that are very tactical, but goes all the way up to very strategic things. So it may be building a beautiful bar chart, or it could be something like knowing your audience, which is a very strategic thing. The last is our consulting. So we do consulting. If you're interested in working with Playfair, you can go to our consulting page on our website. Just simply contact us there and we'll get it going. Other than us, there's a lot of resources in the community. To name a few, I mean, I really do follow just a vast amount of these blogs. One of my favorites is the Flairlich twins. Their blog is fantastic. If you're not subscribed to it, I highly recommend it. There's a lot of great content on there. Then there's things like the best of Tableau. So Andy Cockgreave, and I think his name's Mark Radburn, they do a blog every month where they go through hundreds of different blogs and find very unique and cool tips and tricks and strategies that you can incorporate, and they compile it all into a big monthly blog. So if you're not subscribed to that one, I highly recommend it. Another is the Data Fam Roundup. This is a weekly blog that goes out. And not only do they identify different blog content like tips and tricks, but they also just let you know what's going on in the community. You may find different Tableau user groups are posted on there. It might be a good way to start opening your network to some of those different groups. There's also things, like I said, they do tips and tricks, different community events. They might talk about the Tableau conference, or maybe identify like the coolest viz of the day that week. There's all kinds of stuff in there. The last kind of resource I'll let you guys know is on the Best of Tableau, the monthly blog. Every time they post that blog, there's a link to this Tableau Public workbook. It's a repository of all the blogs that they follow to create that monthly kind of consolidation of content. Highly recommend it. If you go to their blog and find this Tableau Public, it was created by Andy Cockery. You can simply just scroll through here and it gives a link out to every single one of these blogs. So you can just go through, maybe you find one that you want to subscribe to and go directly to that blog and subscribe. It's a great way to at least get started on picking up on where those resources are located. But that's all I had as far as content. So again, I wanted to thank everybody for coming. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions or want to reach out, feel free to reach out to me directly via email at ethan@playfairdata.com. Follow me on Twitter. My handle is @visuallang. And then my LinkedIn is just Ethan-Lang. Follow me there or make a connection. I'm happy to get you into my network. But thanks. I'll open it up to any questions that anyone had.
Hey, it was a really great presentation. Thanks a lot. I did want to ask, are these layers, are they one after another in sequence? Like, say you have to do rework for the client, do you see you always have to go back in sequence again, 1 through 6?
That's a really great question. And as a matter of fact, it reminds me, there is something I want to walk you guys through. Let me see if I can pull it up. I was having issues switching to it earlier, but let's give it a shot. So I actually built a data visualization that answers your question, and I've published it to Tableau Public, so it is out there. But what this does, it's a data visualization. Let me just see if I can switch to it. Brian, do you want to help me out by just kicking me off as the presenter?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was just going to see if I could stop your presentation here now. If I can.
Let me see if
I had that came up before it disappeared naturally. Let me see if I can get the other one to come up. Let's see. There you go.
I think I stopped presenting. I think I found it.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks. The little thing that came up before.
Let me try to share this other screen. Can you guys see that? It should be a Tableau desktop.
Yep, we can see it.
Wonderful. So I built this in Tableau, and what it allows you to do is go through each one of those layers and turn them on or off. And it allows you to kind of add context of like, okay, that's what aesthetics brings to the table, or all right, like statistics is going to give me that. This is a great way. And to answer your question, you really don't have to follow all of these in order. For instance, if you wanted to choose your mark type and then maybe explore the data with statistics before you started adding in more context with aesthetics, you could easily do that. However, I have found it easier to follow them step by step. So you can see here, the first layer I have is data. So we have that turned on. We obviously have our data connected, and I just turned on our mark type layer. So I have created a line chart. If I turn on aesthetics, you can see I've added color now. So we can kind of see the positive and negative dips with this line. I can turn on the filters layer That's going to give the user the ability to switch between these stocks now. So they can start looking and exploring the data a little bit more. If I turn on the statistics layer, you can see now we've added a forecast and a trend line. The last layer, again, is theme. If I turn that on, you can see it really come to life with that professional polish. It adds labels on the view. It's going to add the header, maybe a subheader, and build in just a very minimalistic kind of architecture around the view itself. I do have this published on Tableau Public, so you can go and download it and play with it. But again, just to kind of drive home your question, I can turn on or turn off aesthetics and see that, now we have our line, but we've lost kind of that insight of our color on the view. Or if I wanted to turn off the line completely, now we just have the line with no statistics on there. If I wanted to turn off the theme, now we just have our filter and our line chart. So you don't necessarily have to follow them step by step. Obviously, I think the first two, probably a good idea. You're going to need to connect the data first. But after that, you can really jump around. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that is really cool. I'm going to check that out on Tableau Public. Thanks.
Yeah, before we leave, I'll post a link in the chat so you can find it easier. Any other questions?
Could you post your contact information into the chat as well? That way people could just grab and copy that perhaps?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll definitely do that.
Hey, Ethan, I had a quick question. Great job, by the way.
Thanks.
I'm a little unclear about what you were describing when you were talking about the X and Y position with aesthetics. Were you talking about sizing the axes?
Exactly. So if you have an
Okay.
axis on your view, if you right click it and hit edit axes, it's going to bring up this dialog box where you can start changing the range of your axis. So you can make it a fixed axis. You could say you wanted to make the start automatic, but you wanted to fix it to 8,000. You can do things like that right from here without necessarily getting into the filtering tab or the filtering layer. Another great part is this title. So like I said, when I make Tableau or calculated fields, a lot of times they make a lot of sense to me, whatever I label them as, but it might not make sense to the end user. So you might not end up with something as clean as close price. Might be something very different. So by editing the axes here, you can change your title. So if I wanted to make this, the sum of close price, I could simply just make that adjustment. You'll see that kind of happen over here live as you're typing it in. Does that answer your question?
You bet. Thanks.
Perfect. Yeah, no problem. Any other questions out there?
Hello, Ethan. It's Angel. More of a fun question, perhaps. You were mentioning earlier about how Tableau fails in some of the design aspects to make our lives easier. So
Sure.
You mentioned about rounding corners. What are a couple other features that you think would be useful if Tableau integrated them?
Sure. Another one would be adding shadows. I think that's a just very, flat, kind of very nice touch you can add into your view. You can see the architecture we have built in here. I kind of have these rounded edges around the corners right here, kind of these drop shadow effects that I have. And it kind of makes it, if you play with shadowing, you can either make it look like it's popping out at you, like a button, or you can make it look like it's indented in. So you can like indent things in and then layer in your data visualization within that architecture. So very unique touch, I think. Other things would be buttons and shapes, like these shapes. Obviously, I built those out and brought them in here. These toggles, custom shapes, that kind of thing.
Definitely. I think one of the big downsides, if I recall correctly, is that Tableau doesn't allow SVG formats, which is like a format for vector graphics. They don't allow them to import directly in. I found that pretty interesting when I was first working with Tableau. I've been trying to combine like data and design skills. I was like, oh, you have to get an image format or whatever and then transfer it in and then deal with all that.
Yeah. And hopefully, they're really, if you guys have noticed, at least I've kind of noticed with the updates, they do an update every quarter. They typically have a lot of great stuff in there as far as good, like very unique updates. But I do think the design portion of the tool, they really need to start focusing in on that. I think there's a lot that they could incorporate in there that would be great for the end users.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for answering my question.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions out there?
Yeah, Ethan, this is Pat. I just wanted to thank you very much for the example that you said. You know, you talked a lot, and I understood most of what you said, but the example that you have right now on the board, taking away the layers, that is very effective. And thank you for sending us that link, because I'm going to go through that itself. It really hit home a lot of the things you were discussing. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate the feedback on it. Like I said, I mean, I've done a lot of work getting this presentation put together. I know I do talk fast too, so you'll have to excuse me there, but I'm glad, you know, we're all data people. We're all in this user group for a reason, right? We like to see things visually. I think this is a very good visual aid to the content. So it is supplemental, but thank you for the feedback. Appreciate that. All right. Any other questions, or I can turn it back over to Brian.
I think that's good. Thank you so much. I think this is a good amount of time to go through everything and a lot of good details. I was trying to take notes as you were going through. If your presentation is something that you're able to share too, let us know. What I'll do is, if people haven't noticed, the call is being recorded. So if you do want to go back and watch it again, I typically send out a follow-up email to provide a link to that video so you could find it out. Usually it's out on YouTube, and you can watch it again, or you can share with other folks. Please feel free to share this and any of our other presentations from prior speakers to other folks that might be interested. And I put a link on the chat for our LinkedIn page for NovaTug. If you go to that page, you should be able to find links to all those prior speakers as well, and you'll eventually see Ethan's on there as well. So we'll put that on. And again, yeah, thank you, Ethan, very much for joining us today and presenting. Appreciate it. It's always a learning experience for me. I feel like I'm, even though I'm a co-leader on here, I'm definitely not an expert by any shape of or any imagination on that. So definitely we have people of all different levels in the group. And if any folks are on here that do want to present in the future, or know folks that they want to see or want to suggest for presentations, please let us know. Hopefully at some point we can get back together to meet in person, because I think our very first meeting was our only in-person meeting that we did at my company headquarters in Herndon. So at some point we'll eventually get out and do some meet and greets in person again. So if you're in the area and can join us for that, that'd be great. If there aren't any other questions or comments, or anybody that wants to bring up any other mentions for anything, what I'll mention again is that Paul Albert will be joining us in November. That's November 17th. We'll do 6 p.m. again, and Paul will be our primary speaker for that, if not I think our only speaker that we'll have, other than Patrick, Jeff, or myself adding to that. But thank you so much. Ethan, any last words of wisdom you want to add?
Yeah, I did publish in the chat there the Tableau Public, kind of that supplemental workbook that I built to go along with the content I presented. Also, my email and my LinkedIn is also in the chat. So if you guys have any further follow-up questions or anything like that, I'm happy to answer you if you reach out, or if you just want to connect with me on LinkedIn to follow the content and stuff like that as it moves forward. Feel free to connect. I'm happy to grow my network with everyone at the NovaTug. Again, thank you for Pat and Brian for the invite, and thanks for everybody for attending. Like I said, I know your time's valuable, so I really do appreciate you guys hanging on with me. Thanks.
Yep. It was great. Thank you again, Ethan. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening. We'll see